VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are just about, 5 weeks from training camp. This stuff's going to get hot and heavy real fast. August is all about the preseason and roster cuts. And then don't look now, we are less than 12 weeks away from the regular season when these Vikings will take on those Giants in New York. And we will hope to have a season better than 7-10, which was the record last year. Although I think we're kind of resigned to the fate that would be a dub if they ended up 7-10 or 8-9 in this transformational season. I am here with the producer of the show. We're going to go back and forth today. How are you, Tyler?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing, Dustin?
Not bad. I'm getting back into my routine of writing about the Vikings after almost 2 weeks off in Norway. But what we want to do right now and for the next several minutes is talk about under the radar storylines for the Vikings. So we all know the biggies, like, is it going to be Sam Darnold, JJ McCarthy? It's probably going to be Sam Darnold. It'd be interesting to see if Dallas Turner wins the outside linebacker job right away or if Andrew Van Ginkel is back. We can cross Justin Jefferson's contract off the list, TJ Hawkinson's injury situation. Those are the big ones. But from you and I today, I want to get the viewers thinking about some of the smaller stuff, although it's still very fascinating. So we got about 6 of these. What is your first one? We don't have to put them in any order, but give me your first under-the-radar summer storyline for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, so Alec Lewis kind of alluded to this, but when he was observing mini camps, it appeared like Ryan Wright is still struggling. Like it's looking more and more like year one for Ryan Wright, where he was just fantastic, was a fluke, and we're gonna see closer to bad Ryan Wright in year 3 than we are going to see rookie year Ryan Wright, which has sort of paved the way for our other punter Seth Vernon, who we signed this offseason, to potentially be that front runner, to make the team over Ryan Wright. So that's the first thing I look at is apparently Vernon is playing very well in mini camps, punting the ball. He's got a cannon for a leg like Wright, but he's been a lot more consistent, it appears, according to Alec Lewis. So that is one storyline to sort of look out for is who wins the punter job. It's not flashy, it's special teams, but we might have a new starting punter to start this season, especially since we moved on from Greg Joseph at kicker too. So it would make sense to start a new leaf there if Vernon proves that he is the superior option.
And punting and punters are so vitally important because of field position. It's kind of one of those things that, casual fans might be like, who cares? But it really means a lot. If I recall correctly, about 3 months ago, we were doing a show, I think, about off-season recommendations, and you wanted one of those Aussie punters or one of those long-haired ones, didn't you, from free agency, was it?
I think it was the Chiefs punter.
Yeah, that was him.
Tommy Johnson. Yeah.
Yeah, so you are consistent with your punter takes. Yeah, Ryan Wright was so fabulous that first preseason and then regular season. I remember I was at the Dolphins game, and my friend Wes Johnson, who's been on the show a couple times, the Vikings were pinned deep, and I said, we need one of those 80-yard punts. And I was joking, and then Ryan Wright delivered it. I think it was like 79 yards or something like that. And that won my heart. I was like, okay, this guy's the real deal. Now, last year, he had the touchback problems. I think he had 7 last year when he only had 1 his rookie season. And then, yes, I saw that reporting about Seth Vernon, who hasn't played an NFL football game. He will try to push right to the limit. And I think in my recent roster projection, based on Lewis's observation, probably Vernon is a safer bet if there was such thing as a punter proposition. Do you agree?
Probably. I mean, at this point, it feels like, there's a 60-40 chance that Vernon wins that job. Like it's not like Ryan Wright is screwed already, but throughout the early stages, of OTAs and minicamp, Vernon has looked the part and Wright hasn't. So training camp's really going to determine, who wins that job. And, holding is just as important too when we're talking about punters. I mean, Barry Wright, who wasn't that bad as a punter, but I guess as a holder, he wasn't all that. So, they asked our kicker, who they preferred as the holder, and it was like Ryan Wright. I prefer that guy. So, if I guess Ryan Wright's way to win this is to not only punt well, but prove that he's just got more chemistry with Will Reichard and DePaola at long snapper. So, it'll be really interesting to see how that all unfolds.
Yeah, remember that one, Vikings fans, because in all likelihood, unless this Vernon Wright thing is overblown, which I don't think it is, you will have a new kicker. I don't think there's any chance that Riker doesn't make the team, and probably a new punter if some of this spring and summer steam is accurate. My first one, underrated storylines, isn't WR3 because I consider that a big storyline, chiefly because TJ Hawkinson is going to be out, so the WR3 will be vitally important probably for a couple months. It's RB3, the third running back. And the only reason I really care about this one is because I can guarantee you Aaron Jones or Ty Chandler is going to get banged up during the season. If you play fantasy football, you know that running backs get hurt. And right now, although there are ample human bodies on the running back depth chart, the RB3 would be Kene Nwangu, who I would love, but nobody ever uses him on offense, maybe because he's just not good at it. Myles Gaskin, who had a good year 5 years ago. And then Dwayne McBride, who looked like a fullback when he carried the ball last preseason. So I would like the Vikings to hedge the bet and bring back Cam Akers. That's one of my bold predictions from about a month and a half ago. Or Kareem Hunt or somebody. We know the Aaron Jones thing will probably work if he's healthy. He looked wonderful down the stretch last year. And Ty Chandler, not a great pass protector, but he did the thing against the Bengals and to an extent against the Lions. I want to know if they have a grander plan for RB3 or if Dwayne McBride was just hurt that preseason game or whatever. Or Nwangu once and for all is going to be used on offense, which I highly doubt. I want to know what the plan is for RB3 because I can almost guarantee that you will see that guy get somewhat substantial handoffs at some point in the season.
Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if RB3 is Myles Gaskin.
Yeah.
And just because like he's viewed as the reliable vet sort of in that room, I think they view McBride as a developmental guy that they just sort of took a flyer on in the 7th round.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't think they'd bring Akers back at this point. Not saying it wouldn't happen, but, they'd really have to be injured at running back like mid-season or something to bring back Akers because they're not going to do it right before training camp starts. I think they feel good about the room until they don't anymore, just in terms of injury. And I think with Nwangu, it's just they want him on special teams. The more you have special teams guys focus just on special teams, generally the better it is. Like you want your wide receiver 5 to be your punt returner, not your wide receiver 3. And that's my reasoning or part of it as to why like I prefer Brandon Powell as like a depth wide receiver who can fill in and play decent football, but more of a special teamer than anything else. And I kind of view Kene the same way, especially with the new kickoff rules. That's going to be huge for him. He might have a huge year just because of those new kickoff return rules. So I would want him focusing all of his energy on that and being the best possible returner he could be rather than, trying to be a mediocre RB3.
And that might be the story all along with Nwangu. It's just that when we watch the Chiefs win the Super Bowl every year, we're like, why can't we use speed? Why can't we be one of those cool teams? And he evidently isn't cut out for it, or they haven't positioned him. All right, so we have Seth Vernon as a quasi front runner to win the punter job. The RB3, in addition to WR3, it's got to be somebody. Who's it going to be? What's the plan? What's your next one?
Yeah, so this came out today. So I was reading an article by Alec Lewis. Again, another Lewis shout out. Take a shot for every time
He's
I
been
shout
on the
out
show
Alec
before.
Lewis. Yeah, shout out to him. But Najee Thompson is apparently switching to safety. He was basically a cornerback last year, but definitely more of like a special teams ace. He'd never see the field at, starting at corner or even filling in for anyone. But they're switching him to safety, which to me is like a huge troubling sign for Lewis Cine. If it wasn't bad enough for Lewis Cine, you have 6 guys on the depth chart who are going to be ahead of him because you've got Smith, you've got Bynum, Metellus, Theo Jackson, Jay Ward, and now Najee Thompson is practically guaranteed a roster spot because he's the gunner and the special teams rules benefit the returners more. So you need him out there. They're not going to cut him. So Lewis Cine is like safety number 7, which is basically a nice way of saying he's getting cut. They're not keeping 7 safeties, and 6 is a lot to keep, but they might keep 6 because it's Flores and he values those safeties. But yeah, it's looking grim. If you're Lewis Seen, I don't think he's making the roster at all just because, I mean, cornerback is already crowded too. I mean, they have a strong 5 guys with, so they've got Shaq Thompson, Byron Murphy, Kyrie Jackson, Caleb Evans, and I'm blanking on the last one.
Mekhi Blackman.
Mekhi Blackman, yeah. So that's a strong 5 at corner, I think. You've got a really good top 4 safeties, and then Jay Ward and Najee as a special teams guy. They're fully loaded at defensive back. There's no room for Seen, and there's no room for Booth. So that, I know Seen and Booth in themselves aren't necessarily like underrated storylines, but the fact that Najee is now at safety further endangers Lewis Seen's odds of making this roster.
Yeah, it made it a lot more crowded, at least schematically, because it was already crowded if you just look at it as how many defensive backs will make the roster. But now they would have, we thought it was weird when they kept 6 safeties last year. If Seen wants to be safe and you assume Jay Ward doesn't get cut, which I don't think he would, you would have 7 safeties, and that might set like a record because that would just be, way too many. I think in addition to your idea here, the overall, no matter what, on August, whatever it is, 28th, 29th, there's going to be about 2 or 3 defensive backs. Maybe we're not surprised because we've talked about it for all this time, but 2 or 3 defensive backs, we're going to be like, oh, wow, like a Caleb Evans got caught, LeBooth got. There's going to be guys that we know and kind of love. They're going to leave the team because there's simply not enough roster spots.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's looking grim for Lewis Seen, man. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, we when we had on Ben Lever, you guys had a full-length discussion about that. And yeah, that was not a ringing endorsement from Lever, who should know the team pretty intimately.
And for those who haven't even seen that episode, the whole time I was trying to play devil's advocate for Lewis Seen because, like, he's a first-round pick. You want him to do well. You want to kind of like, when Ben Lever was talking about how his body language was a negative and just the fact that he was so isolated from the team. I tried to make the argument that maybe he's just kind of a quiet guy and some players are wired like that. They're not the most sociable. But like he really laid the hammer on Lewis Seen. So, I mean, even if you're trying to be optimistic, there's not much to be optimistic about. It's not looking good.
Yep, and it's just, even if he was decent or never injured, it's such a deep safety group. It's a good problem to have that he already has that hurdle on top of it. And then selfishly, if he's cut or traded for a late round pick, or our guy Traylon Burks that we manifested a month ago, I'll be glad. I don't want to hear about him anymore. I'm sick of Lewis Seen. Like,
Lewis Seen's going to be an Eagle. Watch, they're going to assemble that entire former Georgia defense, and I don't know what their safety situation is, but I don't think it's as good as it was.
It's Reed Blankenship, and I can't remember the other. It's not as good as it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, they could use Lewis Seen on a flyer for a conditional 7th-round pick.
But I will be glad when it's over because I'm sick of hearing about it. It's so weird. Like, if the Chiefs have a first-round pick, doesn't pan out, nobody cares. Or the Eagles have a first-round pick, the Vikings do it, and it's all we hear about. Ravens play, you're going to hear about Kyle Hamilton on Twitter for 4 hours. I want to be done if he's
Jordan
not.
Davis.
Yep. Well, yeah, he was a stud too. All right, my next one came to light, I would say, last week. Let's see. Dalton Reisner rejoined the club for $1 million, or 1 year and $2.4 million, which was a head scratcher because I thought his free agency took so long to culminate because he was trying to get 6, 7, or 8 million. Nope. He's actually paid less than Blake Brandel. When Kevin O'Connell talked about the guard situation and Dalton Reisner, it basically said he's coming in here to compete. And we're like, oh, okay. And then Ed Ingram's name got put in there. And so when we're trying to figure out, Dalton Reisner really could not start again like he did last year, like you had to wait for Ezra Cleveland to get hurt, it put Ed Ingram in the middle of a guard battle, which I don't know that we knew, right before the draft or something like that. So my underrated storyline is Ed Ingram, the human being. He got off to a rocky start as a rookie because he stepped on people's toes, literally. And then he got pretty good for a while, and it feels like he's going the right direction. But if they sign Dalton Reisner and they have Blake Brandel, who they vocally love, and then second rounder Ed Ingram, only 2 of those guys are going to start. Now, it's cool that they have depth, and this isn't a big crisis. But I think that the solution to figuring out, hey, where does Dalton Risner fit after this Dinker contract, is perhaps Blake Brandel is battling Ed Ingram at right guard, because we know how versatile Brandel is, and Risner just slides back into left guard. I previously thought if Dalton Risner would come back like months ago, he would just be the guy at left guard. But they've touted Brandel as a stud, so Ed Ingram is suddenly not on the roster bubble, but he's on the starter bubble.
Yeah, there's so many ways you could go with that, as just, do we start Brandel at left guard, Risner? Do we keep Ed at right guard or change him out? I mean, the bad thing with Ed Ingram is the fact that he can't stop tripping our quarterback. And Sam Darnold has a huge fumble problem. So how many times this season would you put it at the over-under that Ed Ingram will trip Sam Darnold up, which will cause a fumble and we'd lose possession of the ball? Like, that right there is just like the worst possible play that could happen for the Vikings. Just turnover immediately. Zero chance, right? But I don't think it's all gloom and doom for Ed Ingram, because he is really the last of the 2022 class that has a chance to be like a consistent starter for this team. Lewis Cine, it's not going well. Andrew Booth, not going well. Asamoah had one good year under Donatel, hasn't seen the field since. He's basically like your fourth linebacker. He's Troy Dye at this point. There's not Ty Chandler, I guess, but given the life cycle of running backs, he might be good for us for a couple of years, and then he'll get replaced, as all running backs do. So, like, if I'm Kwesi, I'm looking at Ingram and I'm just praying, okay, please work out, please work out, please work out. And he's shown signs of improvement too. So it's not like it's, it's not all hopeless. So the way I see it is just Dalton Risner is going to be the backup, and that's what he signed up for. And that's why it took so long, is because there's hurt feelings involved in that. He feels like he deserved to be the starter, and he definitely made the case for that. But, I think Kwesi is invested in Ed Ingram at right guard. I think he is also the Vikings' best run blocker out of those three guards between him, Brandel, and Risner.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wouldn't want Risner at right guard because his run blocking is atrocious, even for a left guard. So putting him at right guard when your whole offseason plan for the past 2 years has been improve the run game just doesn't seem like a good idea. So I think there's still hope for Ed Ingram there, personally.
Yeah, if I had to bet, I would have him at right guard on a roster projection. It's just I didn't expect his name to be tossed into the competition, and it was. So we shall see on him. Let's see. We got one more from you, one more from me. So far we have the punter, we have the RB3, we have Ed Ingram, and let's see, what was your last one?
Najee Thompson.
Oh yeah, Najee Thompson's apparent switch to safety. What's your next one?
Yeah, so my last one here is, I don't think people talk enough about Jihad Ward the way that they should be. We talk about like Andrew Van Ginkel a lot for being just this super versatile chess piece for Flores, or, even like Josh Metellus for being able to start at so many different positions and do it successfully. Well, Jihad Ward has been getting defensive line snaps so far early in this offseason program. And that's huge because he's a natural outside linebacker. He's a natural edge rusher. And the fact that he can, provide some sort of pass rush as a defensive lineman at a position where, we sorely lack quality defensive linemen. That's like our one weak spot on this defense. So I don't think he's getting enough credit for, just how good he can be for this defense. I feel like people treat him like he's, just that 30-year-old player who's bound to be replaced by like Gabriel Murphy or Andre Carter or something. No, this is another chess piece for Brian Flores to utilize in this defense. He can do a number of different things with Jihad Ward. So the fact that he's getting defensive line snaps, to me, like he was already the fourth edge rusher on this team behind, Van Ginkel, Turner, and Grenard.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a lock to make this roster, and I think he is the one guy that people just aren't talking about enough that they probably should.
If that is correct, then tell me, out of Andre Carter, Gabriel Murphy, and Patrick Jones, who's on the bubble?
Two of them are on the bubble. So your top four are Grenard, Turner, Van Ginkel, and Ward, assuming you're placing him at outside linebacker,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just his natural position. He can play some snaps on the defensive line, but he is naturally an edge rusher. And I think they only keep 5 outside linebackers. And that last one, right now, I have Gabriel Murphy making it over Patrick Jones and Andre Carter. With Carter, he hasn't bulked up at all within the year. Like, he looks exactly the same that he did last offseason. So that's not encouraging. His whole thing was that he needed to add muscle mass and that maybe his diet wasn't quite right at Army because he was, serving, right? So you can't just like fully jack yourself up for the NFL
Mm-hmm.
when you're serving at Army, right? He's still paper thin, so that's an issue. And then with Jones, he was like graded as the single worst pass rushing outside linebacker in the entire league last season. There's very little upside there. The one thing that Jones has for him is that they also experimented with him, taking some snaps on the defensive line as well. But I think that was more of a, okay, this is our last chance to see if we have anything in Patrick Jones than a, wow, he's really good on the defensive line. So to me, I think they'd want to keep Gabriel Murphy because he was like a 4th round prospect
Mm-hmm.
that we got in undrafted free agency. So I think he's your 5th guy. The only issue with Murphy is that, he doesn't have like the longest wingspan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of like a pass rushing specialist than he is, an every down sort of outside linebacker. But as your 5th guy, that's all you need from him is to provide some sort of pass rushing upside. And I think he does that better than Carter and Patrick Jones would.
And the problem, if you kick Gabriel Murphy to the practice squad, is he could be stolen at any minute. Kind of like Luigi Lane last year, who I don't know if he's still a Panther, but he was stolen. So you always have to be cautious about which one you're going to throw down there, Andre Carter, because if they're as good as we like to think they are sometimes, then they can just be stolen. My final one, and I apologize if this isn't under the radar and it's too big for the obvious category. But mine is the rise of a single defensive tackle next to Harrison Phillips. There's so many guys that could compete and win this job. I'm talking about the 3 technique, the one that we never have a good guy. We thought maybe Christian Wilkins would be in play. We thought they'd draft a sweet one. Then they did neither. There are so many human beings that could win this job. I think Jerry Tillery, because he was the guy they signed in free agency and his precious 1st round draft stock, is probably the front runner. But listen to all these guys: Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard, James Lynch, Jonah Williams, Jaquelin Roy, Prospect X, Levi Drake Rodriguez, Jalen Redmond, UFL's finest Oklahoma standout. And then the undrafted guys, I don't know if one of these is a nose tackle or a different defensive tackle, Tyler Manoa and Taki Taimani. So you're talking about, after Harrison Phillips, 9 guys, and maybe it's 8 because one of those guys is built like a nose tackle, vying for not necessarily a single job, but a starter's job. So I think it'll probably be Tillery. We're going to cross our fingers that he's unlocked by Brian Flores. Kind of feels like a risky thing to hope for, because usually when we hope for that stuff, it never really works out. But there are so many guys that you're bound to think that one of them will show up. Maybe it's Levi Drake. Hey, everybody get the Athletic got that reporting right. This guy's a stud. It's a no-brainer. He's going to play. Maybe it's Tillery being unlocked for the first time. Maybe it's James Lynch, who actually looked good when he was healthy, and he's been with the Vikings for 4 years quietly, just didn't play very much. So that one is so fascinating to me, mainly because I think we are starved for not just Jonathan Bullard, not just Armin Watts, not just Shamar Stephen. We want somebody that's good, and you would think out of 8 or 9 guys, there's got to be some diamond in the rough that can be polished.
Yeah, I think right now the 2 incumbents are Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Bullard, and then Tillery's sort of that 3rd guy with pass rushing upside, and then it's everyone else. Jonathan Bullard to me is just kind of like the least inspiring out of the bunch, just because, he's like a 30-year-old that you're bringing in to stop the run and do not much else. So like, just for excitement's sake, I'm hoping that like a Jalen Redmond will just sort of step up and earn his spot in the rotation, or someone young and exciting. I mean, it's not bad to have a veteran like Jonathan Bullard out there as a starter. It's just kind of like another like Shamar Stephen sort of deal, where you just have this guy that you signed off someone's practice squad or was a former 7th-round pick, and he's just starting for a couple of years when he's more of a rotational guy than a pure starter. But since he's the veteran and he's been here the longest, they just kind of go that route anyways. But yeah, it's fortunately next year that defensive tackle draft class is pretty good. So I think the Vikings just plan to ride it out with their defensive tackle rotation and use certain guys as pass rushers, use certain guys as run stuffers, and make the best out of it. And then they'll draft someone next year to really be that constant presence, in that front three, that 3-4 defense. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. There's a lot of interesting names on that list that you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree that when we get there, let's see, we'll start talking about it about 7 months about the draft. I agree that will be all about defensive tackle, assuming the roster stays somewhat similar, because the first thing we're going to talk about is how the Vikings are going to trade down to get their draft picks back. And then that blends beautifully with getting a defensive tackle, because typically you don't have to spend, hey, the 7th overall pick in the draft is going to be a defensive tackle from Michigan. Usually you can marinate in the mid or late first round and get that guy, which is a perfect medley of trading back. And then notably on this defensive tackle problem or strategy, free agency next year is not like last year when it comes to defensive tackle, or I guess a couple months ago. Defensive tackle was really sweet recently here. I mean, it was like, there was like 10 guys that you were like, all right, hey, let's see if we can get one of those. And then they didn't, besides Tillery. So we won't be able to rely on free agency and the big free cap space piggy bank. So I'm agreeing with you totally that when we get there, and it's not too far away, the draft build up, we're going to be talking about defensive tackle, because once and for all, this team needs one.
Yeah, and last fun fact before we go here, a team did spend the 7th overall pick on a defensive tackle. That would be the Carolina Panthers, taking Derek Brown, who has become one of the best defensive tackles in the league. So I'm not sure if that was purely coincidence that you'd mentioned the 7th overall pick, but Carolina did it. So
when was that
you
one?
never know. That was in the, let's see what draft that was, the 2020 draft, I believe. So,
okay.
I mean, he's already 26 years old. I mean, he hasn't been in the league that long.
Right, so there's precedent for it. Sweet. Because I think there's a guy from Michigan that already, I think Jordan Reed had mentioned as a Vikings target, or just in general, that he's going to be good. And so we'll be profiling those hot and heavy, assuming they don't trade for Jonathan Allen or something like that. All right, man, we'll probably talk to you this Friday if your schedule works with fan guests. Otherwise, we will talk to you next Tuesday about the most pertinent Vikings topics. All right, man?
All right. Sounds good. See you later.
Yep. Take it easy.